I love seeing the reaction on a person's face when I tell them, I teach 7th grade. It's the same look I reserve for kindergarten teachers. Who are those kindergarten teachers? And let's call out preschool teachers tonight here too. All right. I marvel at how you get through your day, and I wonder how you got dragged into it in the first place. Because I would never be able to do your job, right? The short answer of how I got into education is I was not dragged. It seemed like the natural path for me when I was a child, enthralled in playing school, elated when my teachers would give me outdated textbook editions and battered workbooks to cart home. I'd set up the dining room table, and then I'd wait for siblings who'd already decided they'd had enough school at school. And I imagine this scene is very familiar to a lot of you here tonight. Teachers at heart before you even knew what life had in store for you. In college, I steered away from the field of education because I didn't want to be financially limited. So instead, I went into corporate America. Very exhilarating and prosperous with high reward pay for high achieving work. And I found I thrived under this kind of pressure, and I stayed there for many, many years, learning from incredible mentors, some of whose lives were cut far too short. And at every one of their funerals, I realized they were beloved for more than the deals they made. They made a life out of making connections with others. Where would I be leaving my mark? I knew I didn't want it to be limited to my earning potential, so soon enough, a long-time passion was reignited, and I ended up following my heart into the classroom after all. My goal was to be the kind of teacher who could teach about life and leadership, give kids a leg up, make it a little bit easier for them than it ever was for me. I was driven and idealistic. An exhausting combination for a new teacher, right? My plan was to stay just long enough to touch the lives of 1,000 students, and I just finished this past year having taught 2,000 7th and 8th graders. And I'm sure before I retire, that number will double. And for all my years of service, I have made these children my entire focus. Not a lesson goes by that I'm not asking myself, are they prepared? Have I thought of everything? How much more can I squeeze into the academic year? You ask yourself the same questions. Are they happy? Whatever it is they need, I will give it to them without hesitation, and I will do it with love. Because after all, we as teachers are givers by nature. But our bits of training has taught us the importance of self-reflection. So now I'm asking myself this one question. What is it I will be taking away from the experience of being an educator? And my answer is simple. The memories of 4 students who changed everything about my approach to teaching. The early years of my career were solely focused on how to become an instrumental teacher. I built a reputation that assured parents their child would be safe in my class and their child would learn in my class. Because again, I was driven and idealistic. And then it happened. On a particularly bad day at work, when the stress of everything that gets in the way of teaching began backing up on me, and you know what I'm talking about, I started thinking, maybe the idealism isn't worth it after all. And in the very moment I contemplated a return to corporate America, where the rewards of the job are more immediate and measurable, a delivery was made to my room. It was in the form of a letter from a former 7th grade student, now in her sophomore year of high school, thanking me for the impact I made on her. I'll call her Anna. And I'll change all the names I'm going to use in this story. In part, her letter read, "Beloved teacher, you gotta love a kid who opens a letter like that. We don't see that very often, right? Beloved teacher, you should feel really good about yourself for the important role you played in my life." I'm thinking, okay, I'm reading. She goes on to say, "Because of you, your teaching, your drilling was and is very beneficial. I will always remember you for your incredible support and your loving way." And she goes on to list things about her life I never knew, and as I'm reading, here's what struck me most. Everything she took away from our classroom had absolutely nothing to do with my lesson plans. Here I am thinking, I'm scintillating, I'm invigorating. Who wouldn't want to be paying attention to my lessons? They're so engaging. But it became obvious to me that my students were paying more attention to me and not just the learning. And it got me wondering, what were the other kids taking away? And had the memories all been positive? So I started thinking back to my own student days and what did I learn from my teachers? And true enough, it never was about their lesson, but the impact of the connection or the disconnect that has stayed with me all of these years later. What would I do with that? I'll tell you, Mr. Harris was the most instrumental teacher I ever had, but we all feared him for our entire first year of high school. You've had teachers like that. My Mr. Harris, he had one of those life-altering accidents, and that would be the thing to soften him. And when he came through that, he became the teacher who would show me what it means to treat other people as if there's no tomorrow, because he shared his human side with us. Because of the memories of Mr. Harris and Anna, I remembered to approach my classroom as a human first and a teacher second, because my entire goal is to get my students to want to come back again tomorrow. And because of Mr. Harris's impact on me, I ended up fictionalizing him in my first book, Heroes Don't Always Wear Capes, because I believe any kid seeking out an inspiring teacher would be lucky enough to have a Mr. Harris in their life. A few years later, I had Hector, the student you've probably had in your own classroom. Hector doesn't like school, and school doesn't like him. He's the kid who's had nothing but F's since kindergarten. He doesn't like to participate. He won't read. He doesn't like to write. He's hostile to his peers. His teachers say he has an attitude problem, and by the time Hector gets to me, Hector knows what he's worth, and he knows what other people think of him. Very, very little. I felt like, despite his history with other teachers, Hector had a lot of potential. He was a fast thinker, but he had bigger problems on his mind than school. Hector was more worried about where he would be sleeping that night with his family, wondering if it would be the car again. It took the entire year to build trust with that kid, and it took that time for him to practice patience. Instead of feeling frustrated and throwing his books across the room, he'd start showing up to lunchtime tutorials and after-school help. He was becoming invested in his learning, slowly. And by the time the state test results came out that summer, even California decreed, this student, once labeled far below basic, was now considered proficient in language arts. It only took that one accolade for this kid to become a success story. He gained so much confidence, he came back the following year to motivate my new group of students who also believed they could never achieve. He has since grown up to have many leadership opportunities and successes outside of school from people who now call him sir and see him as a person who possesses an incredibly strong work ethic, a drive for success, and no fear of failure. What I learned from my experience being Hector's teacher is I don't have to be afraid of a challenge. Kids want to learn. They just don't always know how to do it by themselves. My next surprise in teaching really took me off guard because here was this beautiful child, seemingly without a care in the world. I would say most likely to grow up to become high school valedictorian. But at home, Daryl refused to eat. His parents had just discovered the extent to which he was being bullied, and they were fraught with worry about his depression and what it might lead to. I had no idea. I thought he was one of the most popular kids at school. But the more I learned, the more I realized he was putting on a front to save face in front of his peers. He literally felt like there was no place to turn. So I became his soft spot to land. And together with his parents, we hatched a plan. He would spend every day of lunch in my class under the guise of working on a project. And as we talked, I could barely contain my tears because his pain was so palpable. Later, when he would return for a visit as a freshman on the JV football team, proudly wearing his football uniform, I could tell all was right with his world. He wanted me to know he was okay, and he wanted me to know what it meant to have an open door at lunch. What I learned from being Daryl's teacher is that even popular kids aren't exempt from being bullied, and that despair can lead to defeat. And what I learned from being Daryl's teacher is I would have missed my chance to help had I been too busy tucked behind closed doors grading my lunch away once again. My fourth and final student is Kim, a sweet little boy, good-natured, a friend to all. But Kim had been out of school for a few weeks now, and kids were starting to ask questions, wondering where he'd been, and I just knew before the bell would ring I'd have to give them some sense of what had been happening. So I opened with, "Class, our friend needs our support right now. Kim is at home with his father, who's very, very ill, and he's extremely worried. So when he shows back up to school, you let him know you love him." When Kim did return, I'd just gotten the email from home that morning saying that the doctors had decided to release his father to die at home, and the time was imminent. And when I saw Kim in the hall, I could tell he was not ready to come inside. He just stood there looking lost. So we stood there together, looking out the window at the trees and the vines, while he asked me just one question. "Ms. Shaffer, whatever happened after your mom got really, really sick?" And he asked it slowly with such heaviness. This was a new crop of students who weren't with me several months earlier when I had just lost my own mother. All I could think to reply was, "Oh, honey, she didn't make it. But I was so grateful for the time that we had to spend together." And with that, we both erupted in silent tears. It was a powerful lesson in empathy for our entire class to have that experience to share and bond with Kim. I have never forgotten Kim or Daryl or Hector or Anna or any of the other many, many students who've come into my life impacting me in greater ways than they will ever know. We all got into this profession for some reason. What's yours? You've just learned about a few of mine tonight. What is it that makes you stay? To get to our retirement, we calculate our years of service. It's not called years on the job. It's called years of service for a reason. So how have we spent our time serving children? What is it They will remember about us, and what is it? We will remember about them. If we're lucky, there will be students to remind us of the gratitude, the trust and confidence, and the despair, and the friends who have touched our hearts so deeply, making this the experience to enrich our lives beyond what any other career could. On the path to success, there is always a teacher to thank. I am so lucky that I had a Mr. Harris in my life, and I will let you in on a little secret because he deserves a shout out. His real name is Mr. Michael McKenna from California, and he shaped the person I have become along with my parents. And without a kid like Anna in my life, my book, Heroes Don't Always Wear Capes, might never have been born. I am grateful for the students that I have had the privilege of teaching, and I try to let them know every single day how happy I am to be with them. And even the hard-to-reach student will brush by my desk in June, letting me know my year-long efforts have just paid off. On the path to success, there is always a teacher to thank. So when the letter from your former student shows up on your doorstep, then you won't be so surprised to learn that for that one kid, you were the single best part of their day. Thank you.